Welcome everyone, my name is Comet, and soon we're gonna have a big changes to the Cataclysm classic version of World of Warcraft, and I know a lot of people would like to get into the game because here, at the end of Cata is where the raids and dungeons really get very challenging, and I know a lot of people would like to experience, what it is to do these raids as a tank. That is why I have for you in this episode the tier list of the best tanks for Cataclysm Classic, and we can start right off the back with a tank that you're gonna see everywhere when you are gonna level up your character, which is the Druid tank, or the bear tank on itself. It's a tank that it's just really fucking good, man. It has so much HP. It has also a lot of resistances thanks to the passive that increases leather armor by quite a massive amount. So overall, this thing is monstrous, man. It just doesn't die, and probably if you are against one-shot mechanics, this thing will survive out of the sheer tankiness that it has, period, and this is one of the reasons why I need to start with this, because it is your overall great tank. It has a bit of everything, has a massive threat generation, a lot of tankiness, has, in fact, while you're leveling up, this thing has a massive amount of damage. This probably has one of the best damage outputs out there, and this is really good also in some encounters, because what a lot of people do not know is that the bear and the cat, they share the same gear. So that means that in some encounters where you only need one tank or two tanks, you can actually go into DPS cat and do massive damage and help the raid in that way. So this thing has so much versatility, I have to put it in A tier, and the only reason why it is not in S tier is because this thing right here exists. This is the Blood Death Knight, and the Blood Death Knight, man, this is the best class in the entire game. In fact, the best everything in the entire game. This is a class that can solo everything. It can solo world bosses, it can solo a lot of the open world quests, it can solo dungeons, and in fact with Firelands and now the Dragon Soul gear, I wouldn't even be surprised is with heroic gear, this thing can solo already some raids as well. Like, this thing is monstrous. This is the type of thing that when everyone gets wiped, it will continue hitting the boss, for probably 2 or 3 minutes. It is really good, and this thing on itself doesn't have as much tankiness as a bear in the sense of hit me hard and then I will resist it, but rather in the sense of hit me hard and then I will be full HP once again thanks to my abilities in like 1 second. Like, this thing has massive regeneration, but it also has a lot of resistances. It doesn't mean that it is weak, it doesn't mean that it gets one-shot. It just means that it requires more skills, to prevent those one-shot mechanics. However, when you are not in a threat situation where, hey, if this thing is not gonna one-shot me, it doesn't matter, I will just do damage. And that is actually the biggest part about the Blood Death Knight, is that the damage that this thing does, listen, I have been a mage main and a hunter main for the most part of Cataclysm, and I'm always in the top 3 of the standings, but right beside me, right behind me, is always a Death Knight. Like, this thing will always be doing more damage than most DPS classes, up until you are in heroic Firelands type of thing. Like, this thing is monstrous. It's not just a tank, it's the best class in the entire game, period. So if you want, however, like I mentioned, you do have to be careful with certain mechanics, because it does require a bit more knowledge. The bear is simple. You just press one button. As simple as that, and then you will not die. With the Death Knight, it does require a bit more knowledge, but nonetheless, it's not something that is gonna take you months to learn, but rather a few hours, of understanding how it works in dungeons and watching a few raid clips. That's about it. But let's continue. Now, these ones right here, yeah, the Protection Paladin and the Protection Warrior. Now, I actually have a massive takeover here. All of the way of phase 1, including heroics, I've always preferred the Warrior, even for leveling, because you can actually go with, in fact, if you are leveling, you simply go arms. You do not go protection. You do massive amount of damage. But this thing has the exact same thing that the bear goes on, you know. If you require damage, the warrior can actually change into arms and do a lot of damage in a raid, which actually happens a lot, especially in Throne of the Four Winds at the beginning of Cataclysm, you know, or in certain encounters in Firelands as well. And coming into Dragon Soul, you definitely want to have the extra damage as well, because in Dragon Soul, if I remember correctly, for Madness of Deathwing, you need only one tank, and everyone else will be DPSing. If I remember correctly, now I might be wrong over here, but from some clips that I have seen, it's only one tank and everything else goes DPS, and therefore, you know, something like this could actually stand up to the fight. So I personally always have preferred this. However, I cannot deny that if you see every single one of the POG raiders, every single one of the guild leaders, they almost always have a paladin. And the reason for this is because it is very easy to play. It is the most brain-dead class in the entire game, but that does not mean that it's bad. It is actually really fucking good, especially in the AoE ability of handling threat. It is fantastic, you will never lose threat. It has a lot of anti-one-shot mechanics, it has a lot of self-sustain as well. The only downside and the reason why I do not like Paladin personally is because this is the first tank who will die. Like, this is the most squishy tank out of them all. And you could say that's not true, it is the warrior, because it doesn't have this ability or that ability, etc. But the thing is that warrior players tend to be better than paladin players, for the most part. So in my experience, you know, running pogs every single day, I always see warriors do well. That's why I'm like, you're a warrior, come to me, I need you. Because they usually know what they're doing. Paladins tend to always pick paladins simply because it's the easy tank, right? In the sense of, they usually go in retribution or healer, but if they need a tank, they just switch into tank, right? It guarantees you a spot in a raid. So I understand that most people would prefer paladin. I personally prefer the warrior, but in reality, both of them are the same thing. You know, they're both behind the bear, and all three of them are behind the Death Knight. But this is just personal preference. If we are actually looking at it from an objective perspective, the main issue comes from the combination of threat, damage, and tankiness. In those, you know, like the Blood Death Knight is a winner. In fact, it generates so much threat sometimes that you have to taunt with the other classes to take the boss away from the Death Knight. It is something that I especially experience have seen in Firelands a lot, you know, where if you drop your blood pool, you're gonna generate so much threat that the other three will have to taunt to gather the other mobs back to you, you know. So definitely this is the best tank. Bear is the second best, and these two are very similar. Honestly, you cannot go wrong with either of them. I think Cataclysm has a really good class balance in general, where everything can actually work, and I have personally done some heroic bosses with both of them. I have personally run every single one of the normal raids with all of these four, you know, except for Firelands yet, because I'm still, you know, well, the problem about Firelands is that it was a bit hard to find guilds or POG runs that are not straight up selling gold, you know, because most people are like, oh, you can only have one item in this raid if you come with us. Nah, that ain't happening. But yeah, in general, all of them can actually work. Don't be afraid if you like the paladin. It's perfectly fine. You can do every single one of the raids. If you like the warrior, it's perfectly fine. You can do all of the raids. But I do advise you that the Death Knight is just monstrous. The warrior and, in fact, all of three of them, you know, are very versatile in what they can do. I personally run healer, you know, Holy Paladin and Tank Paladin because it allows me to do the most. But I know that a lot of people, or most people, would run Retribution and Tank For warrior, you know, arms and tank will just guarantee you a spot in any raid. Mostly because people really like the buff that this brings, and also thunder armor is insane if you have like a rogue or something like that. But yeah, in general, this is how it goes. Like I mentioned, I personally prefer the warrior, just personal preference, but I can accept the fact that the paladin is better because it is. It's not very much though, and all of these classes can do everything in raids. So yeah, that's it for me. Let me know in the comments what do you think about this, you know. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Comet and I will see you on the next tier list. Please subscribe because I'm trying to get to the 500 subs. For now though, I am signing out. Peace.